I was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2004 when I was 43 years old and my two sons were 11 and 13. Since then, the impact of the condition on myself and my family has been immense and changed my whole outlook on the future. I'm now 59 years old, and at this stage of my life, I'd hoped to be planning a well-earned retirement filled with gardening, lunching with friends, playing with future grandchildren, something most people will be taking for granted. But Parkinson's has taken away many of my options and dictates a very different lifestyle. By the time I was 55, I'd taken ill health retirement due to the crippling cramps and muscle spasms that would twist my body into unimaginable shapes, lack of sleep, inability to deal with more than one task at a time, muscle rigidity, and sheer exhaustion. The symptoms vary enormously amongst individuals, from mobility-limiting stiffness and rigidity to uncontrollable movements and shaking, to bladder weakness, depression, anxiety, and inability to cope with stress, to name but a few. It strips you of your dignity and self-esteem and affects virtually every part of the body. The public image of a Parkinson's patient is vastly different to the private reality. The Jekyll and Hyde nature of the condition manifests itself in two very contrasting states. The off state, which describes the utterly frustrating time when medication isn't working, and most sufferers will ensure they're in their private space to avoid public embarrassment, and the on state when drugs are controlling the symptoms. Then I read about the GDNF clinical trial. It took an enormous leap of faith, lengthy discussions with my family, and a good deal of soul-searching to volunteer my brain for such an invasive and groundbreaking trial. But from the moment I met Dr. Alan Wone and his wonderful team, I knew that this was what I wanted to do. I was fully aware that the ultimate price to pay for this chance of getting my life back was to lose it completely. But I dread ending up trapped in my own body, unable to communicate whilst watching the suffering of those I love, and have no wish to inflict full-time care duties on my husband or sons. I have their lives and my dignity to consider. GDNF is a protein which was being trialled for its potential ability to slow down, stop, or even reverse cell death in Parkinson's. In order to penetrate the blood-brain barrier, a delivery device was designed by Professor Stephen Gill to drip this experimental protein directly into the base of the brain by means of catheters connected to a portal on the side of the head. A 3-hour MRI scan produced a 3D image in order to plan a safe route for the catheters to avoid major blood vessels and other areas of the brain that could result in life-changing damage. The novel surgery was performed by a robot under close supervision. This would be followed by visits to Bristol every 4 weeks to be hooked up to the delivery system, which would slowly drip GDNF or placebo into the brain over about 2 hours. Every alternate visit, or every 8 weeks, we had to present to the trial team for videoed assessments, unmedicated. This meant stopping all drugs 24 hours previously, ensuring a very uncomfortable night. Personally, the PET scans were the worst part of the trial, being encased in a claustrophobically small tube with strict instructions not to move for 1.5 hours. Predictably, on the first occasion, I experienced the worst possible mix of all my off symptoms and begged to be let out after 10 minutes. I then required the calm, patient care of my youngest son to massage the knots out of my twisted frame, an experience I would not wish to put him through again, although for me it was an essential part of the trial. But my second attempt was fueled with muscle relaxants and sedatives. But these scans proved crucial, as they showed that GDNF was giving new life to brain cells, as sprouting was seen on 100% of patients on GDNF. Participating in such an invasive trial was challenging, as we faced regular unpleasant scans and procedures. The portal on the side of my head needed daily bathing to avoid infection, and the scars, lumps and bumps left by the insertion of the delivery device made lying down quite uncomfortable. As the trial progressed, the sense of hope grew as the large majority of patients began to show life-changing improvements. Slowly but surely, the GDNF infusions were giving us back our lives. Our confidence and hopes for the future were blossoming into a belief that this was the miracle we'd waited for. Before the trial, I would take drugs at 7:30 in the morning and wait an hour for relief from the stiffness, cramps, and general fatigue. During this time, I was unable to get out of bed, dress myself, or perform any of the routine morning tasks that most people will do automatically. The off state would also hit me without warning, and I could find myself in the middle of a supermarket, barely able to move and without the strength to push a trolley, shrinking from the judgmental stares of those who fail to realise that you don't have to be in a wheelchair to be disabled. There are many triggers which will induce this change, but stress is the worst protagonist. Not a day goes by where I can forget I have Parkinson's. It's like a devil constantly riding on my back. After GDNF, I have more energy, I'm less tired, I can drive long distances once again. Being off is far less painful and stressful, and in short, I feel more alive than I have for many years. I could barely remember life before Parkinson's, but the trial reignited my enthusiasm and strength and rekindled memories of what living truly meant. I knew in my heart and soul that this treatment worked. The exhilaration and positivity I felt was tangible. Friends and family commented on my new lease of life. On a visit to a high adrenaline theme park, it was me talking my husband through his panic attack whilst we were hanging upside down 20 metres above solid concrete and then pleading for a repeat ride on Nemesis. I was initially on placebo, but the improvement in my symptoms shortly after the first GDNF infusions resulted in a reduction in my medication. Today, 3 years since my last infusion, my medication remains the same and my symptoms continue to remain stable. As Parkinson's is a degenerative condition, this is nothing short of amazing. On my 57th birthday, friends and family eagerly gathered in our lounge for a teleconference with the Bristol team to announce the results. The champagne was on ice and the anticipation was electric as we waited for the news that would transform our lives and that of thousands of others. However, when it was announced that the primary endpoint had not been reached and therefore the trial had failed, an eerie silence settled in the room and the telephone line went quiet as the clinical team and the volunteers listening around the country absorbed the news. At this point, I'd like to make it crystal clear that I maintain the utmost respect and admiration for Steve Gill and Alan Wone, who led the research. As a measure of my complete faith in their devotion to Parkinson's research and care, I now undertake a 150-mile return journey to continue consulting with Alan at Southmead Hospital in Bristol, where my outpatient care is second to none. No criticism is levelled at the Bristol team, who were just as devastated as we were with the results. The fate of the trial now rested in the hands of a large pharmaceutical company who'd been given first option on sponsoring further infusions. Whilst the trial had not reached its primary endpoint, patient testimonials and the sprouting shown on the PET scans could not be ignored. Our hopes were raised when funding was not immediately refused. We waited patiently for some form of communication from them. Tensions were rising as the silence and the delay continued, but we clung on to hope. A year with jangling nerves and daily checking of emails passed by with no news. The stress caused by this protracted wait caused havoc to my symptoms. The pharma company then issued a press release to the world in general, advising that they were pulling out of all neurological research. Their decision extinguished all hope, and it was now too late to seek funding elsewhere. It was the final nail in the coffin for GDNF. It ended the roller coaster ride that this trial has taken my colleagues and I on. We'd been told very categorically at the start that we could hope for success but should not expect it. What we had not been prepared for was that the treatment worked, but the statistics would fail to confirm this. To experience improvement in symptoms which has an immense impact on daily life, only to have it snatched away, is the cruelest outcome of all, and I sank into a deep depression. Many volunteers applied to join this trial, but these were whittled down to 42 by the rigorous vetting and strict selection criteria that was dictated by the trial design. Aside from physical fitness, stage of condition and cognitive testing, volunteers were chosen who had strength of character, determination, and a strong mental attitude. Never was this more needed than now. We picked ourselves up, dusted ourselves down, and vowed to ensure that lessons were learnt from our trial experience. The following is a clip from the award-winning documentary that was shown on BBC television back in March 2019, which followed the journey of 6 of my fellow participants, one of whom, Vicky, is sitting here today and has travelled all the way from Newcastle so she can offer me support. So I'll play that clip.
When this is all over and done with, I will literally be able to leap out of bed. That would be fantastic.
It's 2012, and 42 men and women are about to take part in one of the world's most ambitious medical trials.
See you later.
A search for a cure for Parkinson's.
Okay.
We're asking people to have experimental brain surgery.
So we're going right posterior.
Yeah. We're asking people to have an experimental device inserted into their heads.
We're going to drive the needles in, okay?
That's fine.
We're asking people to have an experimental drug. We could do great harm here, and we could genuinely make people worse than they are before they started.
For the last 6 years, cameras have been given unprecedented access to film a clinical trial from start to finish. A world-first look behind the scenes of what it takes to get a new drug to market. From the scientists who believe they have a breakthrough drug for Parkinson's.
I know the drug works. It's a matter of how do you get it in the right dose, in the right place, at the right time.
To the volunteers who put their lives on the line for medical science.
This chance doesn't come along to many people to be part of a trial that could truly shift medicine.
It's a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, where only half get the real drug and half just a placebo. No one knows who's getting what. Not even the doctors.
To have a huge operation like that and then have to have a placebo, is that human? Not really, is it?
Why do we do it? We want to live longer. That's the truth.
For some, there are remarkable transformations.
It was like a bloody miracle. Look at my hands, they're just... Look at that.
For others, disappointment and setback.
I felt something as I went in. It felt like a vessel.
Do you know what? I hope he's not on the drug.
I thought I was going to die.
If this is as good as it gets, I'd be pissed off.
Could this be the miracle drug millions of Parkinson's sufferers worldwide have been waiting for?
See you on the other side.
The bond between the volunteers had grown steadily during the trial as we shared our highs and lows and leant on the only people who were in a position to understand our fears and triumphs, and we stayed in contact. Our aim was simply to provide moral and practical support for each other. But in the absence of any formal care provision at the end of the trial, we soon took on the role of counsellors, liaison for medical emergencies, and helping with the psychological distress of such an emotional outcome. Something had gone badly wrong, but why? Neurological disorders are difficult to assess, and Parkinson's is no exception. But in the absence of any, is no exception due to the wide variety of presentations. Marking aspects like finger tapping, foot stamping, walking and balance are open to interpretation. Whilst being videoed, performance was marked using the UPDRS scale, which ranges from 1 to 5. There were numerous occasions where the nurse would struggle to rate activities, and bearing in mind the target for improvement was 20%, it doesn't take a mathematician to deduce that 1 point either way could make the difference between success or failure. The results were a shock to the participants and scientists alike. The improvement in the majority of patients was unquestionable, and yet this was not reflected in the outcome. Science deals with precision and fact. It measures outcomes by raw statistics acquired by predefined tests. Clearly, there has to be a recognized measure of success or failure. We cannot disregard scientific evidence because we don't like what it shows. However, Where there is a glaring discrepancy between data and reality, we need to have the courage to believe in our gut instinct. I appreciate that there needs to be order and regularity together with universally recognized assessment tools. Otherwise, we cannot compare like for like, and research would become open to abuse. But when the outcome of a trial is a travesty, it should ring loud, clanging alarm bells in the world of research. Vital clues, for example, were not included. On arrival for the off-medication assessments, I needed a wheelchair to transport me to the filming studio, as I was unable to walk due to the spasms which crippled my feet. Incredibly, as this was not part of the marking criteria, it was never filmed nor scored, and I could walk to the studio without... Sorry, I do apologise. Despite my protestations. By the middle of the trial, these previously daily spasms were a thing of the past, and I could walk to the studio without assistance. But this formed no part of the results, despite transforming my quality of life. Cold, hard statistics can be fed into a computer, which will churn out results without questioning their validity, based on how it has been programmed. It is incapable of reproducing the inquisitive nature of the human mind, or the spark of imagination that spawns science's greatest discoveries, and this is vital in the quest for cures. Industry invests jaw-dropping amounts of money into research projects, many of which will fail, resulting in heavy financial losses. Careful selection of robustly designed trials would ensure vital funds are not wasted. Success results in gigantic profits for pharmaceutical companies, professional recognition, and a high-profile published article for the researchers. Yet failure goes generally unnoticed and both will move on to the next project. For the patient, however, the stakes are considerably higher. They carry the burden of the risks and the challenges. Success represents the most precious of all commodities, quality of life. Failure destroys hope. Research is about success and failure, but we need to learn from our mistakes and to embrace the negatives. Failure should be seen as an opportunity and not an ending. The GGNF experience is a prime example of all that is good and all that is bad in clinical trials. It is a model of innovative thinking and bold endeavour, but it's been scuppered by rigid convention and blind prejudice. Blind prejudice because the results are always seen through the eyes of science and no concessions are made to the possibility that the testing parameters are skewed. If we ask the wrong questions, we'll continue to get the wrong conclusions. Understanding of Parkinson's has grown immensely over the years, but the tools by which it is assessed are rigidly locked in the previous century and rely on standardized tests for a non-standard condition, which do not capture the essence of Parkinson's. Whilst I still remain in awe of the scientists, my confidence to question and challenge their perception of Parkinson's in order to inform research has grown immensely, and I've taken part in many projects since to advise on trial design and concept. I am determined to channel what I've learnt into improving future clinical trials, not only to improve the currently poor success rate and to ensure that best participants have the best possible experience, but also to raise awareness that researchers need to acquire an in-depth knowledge of the condition they seek to cure. My youngest son is now a research scientist, so I'm fully aware of the sacrifices and hard work that's needed in this field. Researchers will spend years studying, investigating sources of information, analysing the work of colleagues, labouring in the lab to build on the foundation of their ideas. It is vital that they acquire an in-depth knowledge of their field by utilising every available resource to check that their proposed area of research is feasible, possible and realistic. But they're in an academic bubble, divorced from the reality of life with a long-term condition. Living with a medical condition cannot be taught in the classroom, read from a book, or learnt from the internet. It's only by waking up each morning, bracing yourself for the pain and effort of getting out of bed, feeling completely useless, and waiting an hour for medication to kick in so that you can begin to face the day ahead, with the spectre of what the future holds ever present, that the reality of life with a long-term condition hits home. In addition to the many projects I'm actively involved in for Parkinson's UK, I'm currently working alongside a pharmaceutical company to design assessment tools for use in patient-reported outcomes, and from this was invited to join the University of Birmingham, who are working alongside international collaborators to develop best practice for PROs in clinical trials. If PROs were an integral part of each and every trial, rather than threatening scientific integrity, they would enhance it by highlighting areas of discrepancy and encouraging investigation to ascertain the accurate outcome. Bearing in mind the degenerative nature of Parkinson's, which will always get worse, the euphoria of witnessing even the slightest improvement in symptoms could induce the placebo effect, but a patient's ability to assess their quality of life is instinctive, and the fear of degeneration will counterbalance the urge to be too optimistic. Quality of life is unique to the individual based on expectations and experience, which cannot be replicated in scientific methodology. So do we just accept the scientific findings because that's how it's always been? Or do we dare to use our ability to think outside of the box and wonder whether maybe, just maybe, the patient's testimonials are more compelling than the official statistics? After all, without man's desire to question tradition, we would still believe the world was flat. This is not just about GDNF or Parkinson's, as the principles apply to all medical research. The lessons are there to be learnt. We need the will and the courage to listen and be prepared to embrace change. Participating in this trial has tested me to the limits, and I've grown as a person in the process. I've realised the importance and value of family and friends and gained a renewed sense of purpose in my life. Today, I can reflect on the disappointing outcome and see it in perspective. We've shown that the treatment can successfully be delivered to the relevant part of the brain, proved the safety of the delivery device, and thereby enabled operations to help treat children with brain tumours. So that alone makes it all very worthwhile. But this was not a failure of the drug, but a failure of the tools we have to measure its full effects. I know that I've put those I love through a nightmare journey of surgery, watching me endure terrifying scans, and facing the psychological effects that a commitment of this magnitude creates. But this just scratches the surface of what they must have experienced. The looks on my sons' faces when I left home for further surgery to remove the delivery device told me all I needed to know about how the whole episode has affected them. Once again, they were wondering whether this was the last time they would see their mother. They have supported me when I've been at breaking point, crawling on the floor with me trying to relieve the excruciating painful cramps and muscle spasms that used to plague my feet and lower limbs, particularly following my tortuous experience in the PET brain scanner. The trial was a long journey punctuated by uplifting highs and shattering lows, but it's a journey we've shared together and it's tightened our bonds as a family. My hope now is for researchers to take a step back and examine why so many trials are failing. Is it because the drugs simply don't work, or are we just failing to prove it? There is a whole world of difference, and to people like me, our quality of life depends on them getting it right. I wish to dedicate this presentation to our late colleagues and friends, Tom Isaacs and Carol Hibbard. Both were treated with GDNF and were passionate advocates of its healing powers. They worked tirelessly and selflessly against the odds to advance the cause. We owe it to them both to carry on the fight. I'd also like to thank my husband, who's put up with me reading this speech over and over and over and over and over again. I'd be lost without him. Thank you.